Welcome to the Data Channel, and you're watching SQL for Data Professionals. And as part of this video, we will be discussing about temporary tables and common table expressions. So, what is the difference between these two in SQL, and when to use which one, right? And so, if you want to, if you're looking, this video is more of a theoretical video. So in the previous video, we have already explained the temp tables and the common table expressions in detail in separate video. So there is a link in the description if you want to understand more about that with examples, right? But this video is dedicated to the comparison part of it. So how these two are different and when to use which one in what use case, right? So before proceeding, if you're new to the channel, we would recommend you to please subscribe and also press bell button for instant notifications. So let's get started. So temporary tables are database objects like any other like tables, stored procedures, views, right? But here the temporary tables concept is to store the intermediate data, right? And that stores for the temporary stores for temporary period of time, right? And it is specific to a session or a specific to a transaction. Right, there might be a case where you have a local temporary tables and you have a global temporary tables that we have explained in the previous videos. So it might be a session level or at a transaction level. So as and when the session or the specific transaction ends, so the temporary tables will be wiped off from the memory. So that's the concept of temporary tables, and as the name suggests, it is used to store the intermediate results, right? And they are often stored used to store the results that need to be used or manipulated further within the query process. So that cases we will use temporary tables. And you have a series of steps and you want to break down that steps into a series of steps. The complex query you want to break into a multiple chunks and you want to create a temporary table, right? And there might be use case where you want to kind of store the temporary result um, of a particular query into a temporary table so that that temporary table can be further used multiple times in the stored procedure or in the further use cases, so you need not recalculate that every time, right? So that is the concept of temporary tables. And what is the scope of it, right? So the scope, as we discussed, it is about the session which is that is created. A user creates a session or a developer creates a session, open a client, right? So once that client is ends, right? So automatically the session will be dropped, right? And the table will be dropped. So there are two types. One is local temporary tables and global temporary tables. Local are within the session, global are across the session, different sessions. So it depends on whether you use a single asterisk or double asterisk, right? And these are stored in the temp DB database, uh, like as a temporary. But after that, when the session is getting dropped or transaction is getting over, so that will be dropped from this database. And indexes and constraints. So you can define indexes and constraints and even use them in the joins when you are using a temporary tables. Okay. Further, what are CTEs, right? So CTEs are temporary tables. Like these are temporary results, basically sets defined within a single SQL query. So they improve the code readability and reusability by allowing to break down the complex query into a simple, more manageable parts. So now it might look similar to the temporary tables, right? By definition, it might look similar to the temporary table, the CTEs, but so we will see the difference in detail, definitely, right? So before that, CTE scope is valid only for the statement they are defined in. So as you can see, the temporary tables are within the sessions, but CTEs are only within the SQL statement. So there is a set of SQL statement only. The scope is only that and cannot persist beyond the execution of the query. So it is not session specific. So if you want to use a temporary result to be stored across session, so then you have to go for a temporary tables. But if it is just on the series of SQL statement, then you can go for CTEs. And it can be reused multiple times within the same query. Again, it is the same query, not in the same session, right? And so syntax is introduced with a keyword. So in detail, you can see in that in the previous videos. And there is no physical storage as such. Like in case of temporary tables, there was a tempdb where the data was physically stored for a temporary amount of time. But here there is no physical memory, exist only in the in memory. That means it is in the primary memory and is not stored physically like temporary tables. Okay. So now if you want to really compare this, right, like temporary tables exist within the sessions and transactions, but CTs are within the query itself. There is no session or transaction concept here. Storage is within the tempdb physically. Here it is held in memory. So performance, it is better for large data sets with multiple manipulations. For example, indexing and joining kind of scenarios. In that case, you can go for temporary tables, and the data set is also huge because you need more storage in this case, right? But suitable for simple inline operations without needing physical storage. It might be a intermediate results where you want to store some hundreds of thousands of records only, right? But if your intermediate results is in millions of records or billions of records, so then you have to go for temporary tables because of the memory constraints, or you might encounter the performance issue if you use CTEs, right? And complexity wise supports indexes, constraints, and multiple DML operations, and does not support indexes or DML operations. It is just a read only. So generally CTEs are a little more complicated in understanding. Temporary tables are more readable in terms of readability. And reusability, data can be reused across multiple query within the same session, but here it is not within the same session, but it is in a single query and cannot be reused across multiple queries, or cannot be reused across multiple sessions or within the sessions as well. So ease of use, explicit creation and deletion. CTs are easier to use, declare, and used inline within a query. But readability, personally, I feel temporary tables are much better in terms of readability, right? Because it breaks down into multiple steps, like sequentially, right? If you're a procedural oriented person, so then temporary tables looks more readable for you. Finally, we will understand in what use case we have to go for which one, like when we have to choose temporary tables and when we have to choose the CTEs. So temporary tables can be used when you're basically working with a large data set, right? Because it stores the data in the tempdb, right? And it has a physical location to store. So that is the important thing, and that needs indexing or multiple operations. So which are having a large data set. So this is a main concept, main pointer here, which is having a large data set, right? And when intermediate results need to be reused across multiple queries in the same session. So this is a important another pointer to note. Okay, if there is a large data set, if you want to reuse the data in the same session, okay, and when complex joins or operations are required. So in these use cases, you have to choose the temporary tables. And when to choose CTEs for breaking down the complex queries into manageable parts, right? So that becomes like there might be a complex query, but the query results might be not it's not a large data set. It might be in thousands or like 10,000 or half a million of records. So then you can definitely use this CTEs to kind of break that complexity. And when data is not required beyond the query execution, so even in that case you can use CTEs. Because so you need to understand here, right? So there is always a trade-off. Okay, so when you are using temporary tables, yeah, it supports large data sets, but again, it fills up your go on filling up your memory. So if you are using a lot of temporary tables, it'll kind of overburden the memory of your database, right? So CTEs are not like that. CTEs are like use and throw kind of thing. So it is just used on the spot and it is just cleared. So, but temporary tables, that is why in temporary tables case, you have to drop the tables explicitly, or you have to end the session to kind of kill that or remove the data from the temp DB, right? Um, so CT is also when simplicity and readability are the priority, so you can definitely choose the CTs. Okay, so these are the use cases. If you have any queries or if you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to comment in the comment section. Thanks for watching.